right, we're going to get started now. I don't think Dr. McArthur really needs an introduction because he's pretty much known by everybody. So we're just going to get started. So let's give a big round of applause for Dr. Ronald P.
Okay, the genesis of this talk was I was talking to some of the young men during the year, and so they thought, well, it might be good if somebody spoke to them about the importance of the school, the genesis of the school, some things in the Blue Book, and what to do in the future. So I was asked if I would do it, and I'm happy to do it. So let's hope it works out for you, okay? First of all, I thought about how to do it, and I thought about what might make sense for you. So see if this works. First of all, to place the school. It seems to me the first thing to do is think about the condition of what we call Western civilization, okay? This civilization was formed by the Catholic Church, not exclusively because there was paganism before it. There were some pagan elements in it, the philosophers, thinkers, the mathematicians, etc. But finally, Western civilization was formed by the Church. For the last 400 years or so, the Catholic Church has been embattled. And now we, the Catholics, have lost that battle. The Catholic Church is now the Catholic Church is now on the periphery. It counts for nothing. An example of that is the European Union. They want to form a European Union so they can resuscitate Europe. Now, in doing that, one of the rules is that you cannot mention the importance of the Catholic Church in the formation of Europe. Not only that, you can't even mention that the Catholic Church ever existed in the formation of Europe, nor can you mention anything about Christianity. So the new Europe comes out to be something like the result of a sexual revolution with abortion, contraception, the rest of it, and that's supposed to unite a new Europe. And now you have people running around the world preaching that kind of unity for Europe. The church has been marginalized. Now, if you take Catholic education in this country, the education in this country was once seriously Catholic. I don't deny that at all, that there were a lot of people who worked in Catholic education who were really good people. There were Catholic schools and they sprung up all over. There were Catholic colleges and Catholic universities. What happened in this century is that more and more the universities and the colleges began to imitate the worst features of secular education, the worst features of education that came really through the modern philosophers. And therefore, insofar as the curricula of the Catholic colleges and universities were concerned, they were just like the curricula of the secular universities, but there were added courses in scholastic philosophy and then courses in religion. Too often the courses in scholastic philosophy were textbook courses, and therefore they were supposed to, in a way, inoculate the Catholic student with some kind of reference to the Catholic Church, but the rest of the curriculum imitated all secular education. And pretty soon, not even the philosophical part of the education stood, and therefore more and more the schools were becoming like every other school. Now, what's characteristic of this civilization is, you see it all over, is what's called nihilism. That means nobody knows anything. It doesn't matter whether you affirm something or whether you deny something. That doesn't mean that your parents are all nihilists. It doesn't mean that a lot of ordinary people are nihilists, but it does mean that by and large, the intellectuals around the universities, they know that nobody really knows anything. and that therefore there's no way in which you can educate in terms of the truth, and there's no way you can educate in terms of anything firm, and there's no way you can deal with students and lead to anything that would be called wisdom, because that's all impossible, and everybody knows that. Education then turns to the practical, and so most people go to school because they know that if they get a degree, they can get a better job, and I think the statistics back that up. If you have a degree in something, you can usually get a better job. So there's hardly any education that's ordered institutionally to anything that's sound intellectually or sound morally. That doesn't mean, in my opinion, that there are not good people all over in the universities and colleges and in America, in secular institutions, who are not good people and don't try to do good things, and they themselves buck the trend. But the trend is certainly that. Now, what we saw when we started the school is that the Catholic schools were getting worse and worse, and therefore they were simply disintegrating. So what we thought was, in terms of reading the things that we read and thought were worth studying, that if you didn't start or have a school that was radically Catholic in terms of the right understanding of theology with respect to philosophy, of the teaching church with respect to all intellectual disciplines, there would be no Catholic education whatsoever. That's what we thought. And in all the situations that we were in teaching, we saw that more and more and more and more. There were all kinds of people hired in the Catholic schools who were Marxists, atheists, all kinds of philosophical opinions. It became a madhouse. And that's what drove us to try to start a school. If things had been more normal, and now what I mean normal, the normal I don't think was very good, ever. I don't think, but if things had been more normal, it would never have occurred to us to start a school. The only thing that forced us to start a school was we thought if we couldn't do something of a serious Catholic nature, then there wouldn't be anything of a serious Catholic nature. That's not true now. There are certain things that have started up of a serious Catholic nature. I'll try to make distinctions between this place and most of the others. However, that's what we thought. Now, when you go to start something, we thought the first thing that had to be done is to write a document so that we knew what we were doing and everybody else would know we were doing, and to commit ourselves to that document. So we put it to ourselves, the document we would write would be serious, would be an apology with what we were doing, and if we couldn't do what was in that document, we wouldn't do anything, because we saw that unless you do it right, you're not going to do it at all. Chesterton once said, whatever is worth doing badly. I never agreed with that. I think whatever's worth doing is worth doing well, and if you can't do it well, then forget it, because if you start to do it badly, it'll only get worse. It'll get worse and worse and worse and worse. So that's why we wrote the Blue Book. Now, when you look at the Blue Book, I do think it's right to say, and a lot of people have told us this, that the Blue Book is an extraordinary document. It might be extraordinary in our time, but it's a very ordinary document. It's simply a document that talks about Catholic education. It talks about Catholic education in terms of certain principles which are proper to Catholic education. In that sense, it's not at all an extraordinary document. It flows out of the understanding of the teaching church, of the history of the teaching church, intellectually, of the relationship of theology to philosophy, of philosophy to to philosophy and experimental sciences and whatever. So I don't think it's an extraordinary document. I do think it lays out what we're doing, and lays out what we're doing pretty well, so that no one who read it would be confused about what we were doing, or when we started about what we were trying to do. So that document has really served us, because on the one hand, it attracted people to us who thought it was the right thing to do, and on the other hand, we didn't waste time with people who didn't agree with us, and trying to get their money would be futile. So one of the things the document did, in a way, it aided us in raising money, and it culled the people who were for us out from the people who were against us. So what we found when we tried to raise money for this proposition, that only a relatively few were interested in what we were doing, but that those relatively few were very interested in what we were doing. And therefore, it served us with respect to raising money. And because that was one of our tasks, to raise money. We had no money when we began. And therefore, we just had to start raising money, start to talk to people and whatever about the document. And so it served us. And it served the school well. And the school has never deviated from those principles. As a matter of fact, the whole thing has been set up to propagate a school according to those principles. That's right in the polity of the school. So the whole document has served us. And I've been asked over and over and over and over the years, is the school still as good as it was when it began? The school is better now than it was when it began. The faculty is better. There are a lot of young tutors who have come young, not young in your terms, young in my terms, but anyhow, a lot of young tutors have come. They've given their lives to the school, and they give their lives to a common good. So you'll notice that there's no, with the tutors, there aren't full professors and adjunct professors and the rest of it. They're just tutors. And therefore, they give themselves to the school, and they give themselves to the students, and they become relatively anonymous with respect to what we're doing. Now, let's talk about what we're doing. And some of this, I'll say, is autobiographical. I can't commit the other tutors, the other founders to this, but it certainly affected me. I remember after the Second World War and going to college, we had to, when I was in college, read the great books. Now did not include the mathematical books and the science books. It did not include that, but it did include the other books. And when I started to read those, because they were required courses, and they were discussion courses. And so when I started to read those, I could tell immediately the difference between reading those books and reading textbooks. And it dawned on me, as soon as I started to do that, I said, well, why does anybody use textbooks in education? Why do you use those books? They don't tell you anything. They just give you a lot of conclusions that people memorize. Nobody understands anything. Why don't we read these books? Why don't we make these books the books for the whole of education? That dawned on me a month after I started to read Plato, for example. Why don't we read Plato? Why do we read those textbooks? So that was the genesis of our conviction that genuine education, forgetting Catholic education for a minute, but genuine education would be concerned with reading the important text, the really important text of great minds, and trying to deal with those great minds. As for the discussion, then we said to ourselves, well, American kids are used to discussing everything. They live in an egalitarian democracy. They don't want to be told anything. Therefore, let's have discussions, and we'll have seminars, and we'll have discussions, and we'll lay it out, and we'll see who wants to discuss, and we'll try to bring people along in the discussion. Now, we were lucky because St. John's College had been doing something like this since 1937. Therefore, we had the experience of St. John's College. And then at St. Mary's College, where I went, and then later, we were doing some of this with students in a separate program, and therefore we saw that it could work. And what St. John's College did for America, I don't think America has profited by it, but what they did for America, among other things, was to show American education, how you can deal with the great scientists with people who are not scientists. That is, how you can read Galileo, how you can read Newton, Copernicus, etc., how you can read those texts with students and make some sense out of those texts with students. So we had the example of St. John's College in front of us, and we had done some of the things that St. John's College was doing. So we knew that it would work if you could get the students to come to a school that did that exclusively. So that's a story in itself. If you try to do this kind of thing in a university generally, what you'll find is a tremendous hostility toward it, a tremendous hostility toward it. I'll give you an example. When I first did Newton, I never did Newton here at this school, but I did it at St. Mary's College well, in fact, as a matter of fact, I did it with Tom Dillon, Larry Shields, and I don't know about Mike McLean, but I did it there at St. Mary's. And the head of the physics department, who was a very devout Catholic and a good man, he literally was apoplectic. He was foaming at the mouth, and he came to me and said, "Are you going to read Newton? You're going to do Newton with students?" I said, "I am." And he said, "Have you ever read Newton?" I said, "No, I never read him." And he said, he said, "Do you know what's in it?" I said, "Not really." And he said, "Well, how are you going to read it with them?" I said, "I really don't know now, but I'll try to figure that out as I go along," I said to him, you know. And he was absolutely out of his mind that I was going to read, because Newton, of course, is the great basic physics for the physicists until later in the 20th century, and he had quantum mechanics, you know, that fiddles around with Newton. But at any rate, he was really, and he liked me. He was really upset that that was going on. So if you try to start an operation like this in universities or in colleges generally, you'll find a tremendous antipathy to it. So all the time when we would go to lunch, there was a faculty lunchroom. You go to lunch, you spent your whole lunchtime arguing with somebody about something. What about this, and what about that, and what about the other thing? And so we saw that if you were going to do this kind of thing, that you had to do it alone. You couldn't do it as part of a larger institution. That grew on us as we thought about it. You just had to do it alone. And the second thing is, we wanted to be Catholic and seriously Catholic. And if you want something to be seriously Catholic, then strangely enough, you have to listen to what the Catholic Church teaches. And therefore, you have to obey the Magisterium of the Church. And therefore, that itself was a problem. Because the universities the Catholic university you try to do this in, or the college you would try to do this in, by and large wouldn't agree with what we thought was absolutely necessary. And that was that it be Catholic in the serious sense of Catholic. Now, what did we mean by Catholic in the serious sense of Catholic? Here's what we meant. Ever since the death of St. Thomas Aquinas, the popes, almost all of them, the popes have said, St. Thomas Aquinas is the greatest thinker in the Catholic Church. The greatest thinker in the Catholic Church. Forget for a moment. Christ, certainly, the apostles who were graced by Christ. After that, in terms of teaching, learning, knowledge, wisdom, etc., Thomas Aquinas is the greatest Catholic teacher and the greatest thinker. Every pope, almost since the death of St. Thomas, has said that over and over and over and over. Hence, in our view, you could not have Catholic education without having Catholic education somehow ordered to the study of St. Thomas Aquinas. That to us became absolutely clear, and also clear from experience, but it also became clear when we considered how a school would be Catholic. And we saw in our time, before we started the school, but we were teaching, that St. Thomas was more and more being pushed to the sidelines, more and more being pushed to the sidelines. Less and less was he read. Then, if he was studied at all, he was studied in textbooks. And therefore, the textbooks lead you to memorize propositions in St. Thomas, or memorize this or memorize that, and it never touches your mind. You know, Mortimer Adler used to say, that teaching and learning is going from the notebook of the teacher to the notebook of the student without passing through the head of either. And that's why that's what a lot of it came to. And so you had a lot of young people, a lot of young Catholics who had gone through classes like that, memorized things, memorized slogans and things, and when push came to shove, they all disappeared. So that after the Second World War, and more Catholic kids were going to Catholic schools after the Second World War, the Catholic body became very, very wealthy after the Second World War. And so as Catholics became more wealthy and more wealthy, they became more concerned with this world and more concerned with this world. And in the measure that they did that, they lost the faith. And so you see now, millions of Catholics don't go to church. Of those who do go to the church, half of them don't know what they're doing. And there you have it. And a lot of that was due, I think, to Catholic education. A lot, not all of it, but a lot of it was due to Catholic education. So we thought, if you're going to have Catholic education, then you're going to have to order things according to the mind and the principles, the doctrine of St. Thomas Aquinas. That's what the Pope said. So therefore, for us today, as well as yesterday, but for us when we founded the school, if somebody does not want to do that, then he doesn't, in our mind, he does not want Catholic education. Then you do not want Catholic education. One of the great teachers we had at Laval used to say, if somebody attacks St. Thomas or tells you not to study St. Thomas, you do him great charity to call him an idiot, because other than that, he's a devil. And the reason for that is because if you turn people away from that, you're going to turn people away from finally the wisdom of the church, because the church itself, in its ordinary teaching over and over and over and over, has taught according to the mind of St. Thomas. Therefore, that was bedrock for us, that we had to do that. So that's another reason why you couldn't have a program like this going on in another school, because that other school was not going to do this. And we saw that all the Catholic schools were going just the opposite direction. Therefore, we were on our own. So the question is how to do it on our own. So then we had two problems. You need money and you need students. So somehow we got the money. And someday I'll sit down and tell you stories about fundraising, which are really funny, because fundraising is a crazy game. You can work and work and work, and somebody will give you $50, and you can meet somebody in an airplane and start talking to them, and pretty soon as they become interested in the school, and all of a sudden you get $100,000, and you just met the person and spent half an hour talking to them. So it's really crazy. But anyhow, we did get the money, so we were able to start. Now the question about the students. And now I'm talking about them who first came, and that means I'm talking about you who have continued to come, because there's no difference in my mind. The only difference is a calendar difference, but there's no difference essentially. The first students who came were shockingly good in my mind. There were many who came who had degrees in other schools, who had gone to other colleges for 2 or 3 years, and who came to this thing. Now remember, there were 32 students who came with a freshman class. I don't know, 3 or 4 teachers, 32 students. We had hardly any money. We had no record, and they came. And some of them were very, very able and very, very intelligent. And I'll never forget when I said the first week, I said, now, what newspaper should we take? And there were too few people to have a riot. But if there had been 200, we'd had a riot. And they said, we don't want a newspaper. We didn't come here to read newspapers. We came here to study. You're proposing that we have some kind of Christian education. Let's get on with it. We can read the newspapers anywhere. That's the things they told me. They didn't care about that. So right from the beginning, we had students who really cared and really came to do this. It didn't matter that we had no accreditation. It didn't matter we had no history. None of it mattered. They read some of the written literature in which we tried to attract students, and they came for those principles. So right from the beginning, you had a lot of the students who really cared about these things. Now, as for the habituation to the faith, here's another story, which I think is significant. The very first seminar we had, I was leading that seminar with a freshman. I forget what we were reading, probably the Iliad. So it came 9 o'clock. So the discussion was still going. It was pretty well heated. So the discussion kept going, and I'm in the middle of this discussion. And all of a sudden, they shut it down. So I kind of startled about the shutting down. And they said, oh, no, we can't go on now. Rosary's at 9:15. This is the first week of the school. Rosary's at 9:15. I said, Rosary's at 9:15. Oh, so they had started that. We didn't start that. The administration didn't start that. They started that. They started that rosary, and that rosary became bedrock for them. And therefore they started to say the rosary, etc. Then I found in the pews, then I would find St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, and major spiritual writings. And that was, those spiritual writings were brought by the students. So some students at least were reading those and praying those works in the chapel. So then it dawned on me, because I had not experienced this before. Then it dawned on me, listen, there's something supernatural going on here. I never expected it. I didn't know what to expect, but I never expected it. And therefore, we have to figure out some way that can be nourished without at the same time destroying education, because there are some people who are spiritual who don't care about education. And after all, we had a college, and therefore we had to do that. So we tried to do that. And the very first Christmas party we had, there were a lot of the Grimm family who were there right from the beginning. So right away, we have a Christmas party. So I thought to myself, man, what are we going to do in a Christmas party? So I thought, I can just imagine the Christmas party. So we have the first Christmas party, and then we have a bunch of kids singing Handel and Bach and this kind of thing. And they set the tone for that. So right away, you had a tone having to do with the excellent music. There were certain habituation to things in art that were high and noble, and they really wanted to study, and that's why they came. Now, that's not true of every one of them, but it is true of a lot of them. And therefore, I used to say, and I say still now, and I said over and over and over, if it weren't for the kind of students who come here, even if the faculty were decent and good and able to educate, you couldn't educate anybody. It wouldn't work. So all through the years, there have been really good students, and those good students have made this school possible just as much as the administration and the faculty and all the rest of it. And so, and if it ever becomes a time when the students will not come, then the school will dry up. That gets me to speak about, what do you mean by good students? Here's what I mean by good students. First of all, you have to have a sufficient intelligence to do this. You can't do it if you don't have a sufficient intelligence. But the main thing, given sufficient intelligence, the main thing is a desire to do it and a certain wonder that prompts people to really want to do this, to really want to do these kinds of things. If you don't have that, then you can have people who are very bright, but it doesn't touch them. And then, or if you find people who just do it dutifully and think the school is a good place, it's nice to be here, we make good friends, there's a decent moral way of life here, then, and therefore we stay, that won't work for the school. You have to have students who really want to do it, who think it's really, really important, and who want to keep pursuing these kinds of things. If you had only a very few students who wanted to do this, and all the students stayed because it's Catholic or a nice place or there are mountains around here, it wouldn't work. It'll only work on those grounds. Now, here's the big downside in what we do here. That's not your downside. That's the downside that can suck us all in. As soon as you say, for example, the school is Catholic, in our sense of Catholic, the sense of Catholic that I'm trying to illustrate for you, then, in a way, every Catholic knows the answers to all the major questions. For example, in one place, St. Thomas says, any washerwoman knows more than Aristotle. Now, he doesn't mean that every washerwoman knows the metaphysics of Aristotle better than Aristotle does, but he means that every washerwoman needs there's God, there's one God who created the world, there's a Trinity, there's the Incarnation, there's this, there's that, etc., and holds that with certitude by faith, all right? Then, given that, then the temptation is to use that as, in other words, we know the answers. So what are we studying all these things for? What are we doing all these things for? Is the soul immortal? Of course the soul is immortal. I believe the soul is immortal. Is there an afterlife? Of course there's an afterlife. Is there going to be a resurrection of the body? Of course there's going to be a resurrection of the body. So given the faith, there's a temptation then to close down intellectually. That's not necessary. You see that that's not necessary when you read St. Thomas Aquinas. You see that that's not necessary when you read St. Augustine. You see that that's not necessary when you read St. John Damascene, okay? You see that that's not necessary. However, it's a temptation. In the measure in which anybody falls for that temptation, this school dries up, okay? Because the faith should increase the sense of wonder. One should say, how can there be an incarnation? What's the real presence come to? What is it? What are we saying when we say the real presence? How about this? How about that? Does the resurrection of the body make any sense naturally? Is there any natural help for that? And you go on and on and on. So if having the faith doesn't lead to an increase of wonder, then the school's in trouble, because then people start to memorize or go through a system and come out the other end, and it doesn't touch them and it doesn't do what it could do. Okay, I say that because I think it's a temptation for us all. 100 students over the 500 years I've been teaching, but 100 students have said to me over the years, gosh, you know, when I read St. Thomas, I understand him perfectly, but then when I take a test, I just forget it. Well, what they mean by understand him perfectly, they mean they thought they had it in their in their memory, the sentences. You see what I mean? They didn't understand a thing, because if they understood something, it wouldn't all of a sudden leave them at a certain time, because you understand something. So, having the faith should lead people in a way in this whole enterprise more and more to wish to study in the way that it led St. Thomas to wish to study. That's what should happen to you at best. That's what should happen to all of us at best. If that doesn't happen, then the school tends to dry up. And it will dry up if all the students were like that. All the students are not like that. But in the measure in which students are like that, then in that measure, the school can't function. Now let me tell you why, just from practical reason. If you have lectures, the lecturer comes in and he lectures. Whoever listens to him, listens to him. Whoever doesn't listen to him, doesn't listen to him. The lecturer doesn't care who listens to him. Therefore, if you listen, fine. If you don't listen, fine. He's done his job by lecturing. However, if the role of the tutor is to bring a class with him in terms of what comes out of discussing things, then the tutor has to be concerned with bringing everybody along. Because if the tutor says, listen, I'll just talk to the people who talk, and the people who don't talk, I don't care about them, let them sleep, or something, that won't work. So it won't work because of the method, it won't work because of the promise of the school, and it won't work because of the whole situation. You can't have a few people discuss with the rest of the people don't care, then you're destroying a class. Therefore, in the measure in which the students are not prepared to discuss doesn't mean talk. Talk is cheap, but to discuss and discuss seriously, and that measure, there's a certain depression in what we do here. Therefore, what I always try to do is encourage people to discuss. Now, you can't make them discuss, but encourage them. It's very true. There are some people who hardly discuss at all, who are really, really bright and do learn. I admit that. But it would still be better for everybody else if they would participate in the discussion and help in the discussion. Now, that's what I mean by a good student, okay? I don't mean by a good student those who have the highest SAT scores. That's not what I mean. I think over the long run, the better the SAT scores, the better chance you're going to have to make something like this work, by the way, okay? But there have been students who have come here with relatively low SAT scores, I can think of them right now, have been really successful in this school and have learned, okay? And there have been people who have come with very great abilities, and they've learned nothing in this school. It was a waste of their time, and they probably wasted other people's time. So what I encourage you people to do is participate in the program. That's a hard thing to do for some people. It's easy for some people to do. It's hard for other people to do. But in the measure that's done, and more people do it, then this school works better. So you've got a school which I think is right-headed. It's going in the right. It's going in the right direction. It keeps going in the right direction, and it will keep going in the right direction in the measure in which we all cooperate in terms of the end of the school. Now. Is this school important? Well, it seems to me the first importance is if it does any good for you. If you think it does some good for you, some real good for you, then the school has been important, all right? Does it have any other importance? Well, let's take things in a more general sense. The philosophers rule the world. The whole of modern culture is based on the modern philosophers. It's not based on Aristotle. It's not based on Plato. It's not based on that's all thought to have been refuted and a bunch of myth and whatever. That's all gone. Okay, it's not gone. It's not false, but it's all gone in the cultural imagination. The philosophers rule the world. The politicians don't do anything. They're just a bunch of clowns who live off the ideas that some philosopher propounded 200 years ago that's been passed down that they don't understand. Nobody else understands. They become slogans. That's all they do. So, is this school important? Well, it seems to me in the measure in which you have people who understand something, who can reason about something, who can see the connection between principles and conclusions, and who have a kind of inclination to go back to principles and see what are the principles and what come from those principles. In that measure, things are better rather than worse. Now this is my opinion. I'm not proposing this in terms of the school or not. This has been my opinion. It's growing my opinion. You look at this world, okay? Now, you're living at a time, for example, where gay marriage is coming, abortion is there, and there's very little chance of getting rid of abortion legally, and it's getting worse and worse, and you can see that. The older you get, the more you'll see of that. That's the culture, all right? You can trace those positions back to philosophical positions. They didn't just come out of the ground. That somebody stood up and said, let's abort. Somebody's Planned Parenthood is based on eugenics. Eugenics is a whole philosophical view of life. And therefore, it's those positions that count. Now, in the measure in which there are people who can counter, I'm talking practically now, I'm leaving aside the good speculatively. If somebody says to me, it really doesn't matter if you know anything about God speculatively, then that's another whole argument. But if you grant that it does, then also practically, then things are better rather than worse in civil society. Now, finally, are things better in the church? It seems to me, yes, they're better in the church. If you don't have in the Catholic Church anybody who knows anything, that's not true that nobody knows anything in the church. I didn't mean that. But if it were true that nobody knew anything, then the church would just simply flounder around with no hope, with no possibility of ever coming to anything better. In the measure in which then there are people who are in the church who know something, then things are better. Now take women. Most of the girls here marry, and that's good, and they have children. And they have children according to the norms of the Catholic Church, which means that by and large the families are large. That itself is laudable. Now, what do you do with your children? So educating the young, and educating the young in a right way, that itself redounds to the good of the church. Not only the good of the children, but to the good of the whole church. Families can give good examples. The children are raised correctly. They can be directed to really good things. So if you see what a mother can do with families, and what a lot of your own mothers have done with families, and fathers too, by the way, if you see that, and then you judge that and say it's better to be the CEO of eBay or something, then it seems to me, I don't know what to do about that. Then you're talking about somebody who's insane. So the families, and the families count. There's no future without the right families. So in that sense, what's done here redounds to the families through, to a large extent, the women who, rightly ordered, will be at home with the children, as well as the men. So therefore, there's good that happens in the church. There's good that happens in the country. I always emphasize the church for this reason. This civilization is so bad now that, to me at least, when I think of it, only God can bail it out by some kind of a supernatural earthquake or something. Now, but along the way, we can do certain things and prepare certain things to be better. Now, why is it only the church that can change things or for the better? For two reasons. It's only the church that has the truth. That is, take the Apostles' Creed. It has the truth about things. At the simplest level, at the profoundest level, it has the truth about the questions people ask. Where do they come from? Where am I going? What's the whole thing about? So it has the truth. Secondly, it has the sacraments. And the sacraments are the ordinary means of salvation. I don't deny that God can give grace outside the sacramental order. I deny that he does it very often. So the ordinary means of sanctification are the sacraments. That's all in the church. Therefore, my opinion has always been for young people to direct their attention to what they can do within the church, as families, obviously as priests, as nuns, as whatever, as monks. But all of us can do something within the church in order to strengthen the church, because there's no hope unless the Catholic Church comes back and the Catholic Church has some say in whatever new order is going to come about, because some new order is going to come about. The old one's all gone. It's gone. And you're never going to bring it back historically. Now, hopefully you'll bring back the same kind of thing in terms of principle, but that can only be done by the church. That can't be done by any secular government, etc. It cannot be done. Let me say this. If you're interested in going back to principles, this whole society is a contraceptive society. Take America, Europe too. Take America. It's a contraceptive society. As long as you have a contraceptive mentality and contraception as a way of life, then you have destroyed marriage and families right in the beginning. They're destroyed, okay? If you have any kind of a decent family, it's all accidental, because you've destroyed marriage. You've destroyed the marriage in terms of purpose. You destroyed the marriage in terms of the sacrament. You've destroyed marriage. Once you've destroyed marriage, then you destroy the family, and you destroy the education of the young. And once you destroy the whole of family life, which you do with this, it goes on and on and on. Once you do that, you'll never understand economics. Therefore, you have families now living for the economy, not the economy serving the family. Aristotle's got it right in the first book of the Politics. It's absolutely right there. So now you serve the economy. So now what you'll find is the economy will get a little better, it'll get a little worse, it'll get a little. You can't solve the economic problem because the economic problem can't be solved without families. The problem of the family can't be solved without the right order of the sexes. The right order of the sexes can't be solved without until you get rid of contraception, and you can't get rid of abortion as long as you have the contraceptive mentality. So here we are. See what I mean? At least it seems to me with this kind of education, somebody would get a little better habit of tracing things back to principles. See what I mean? What are the first principles? And as Aristotle and St. Thomas say, if you make a mistake in the beginning, then that mistake will proliferate all through your thinking. See what I mean? It's like trying to balance your bank book. You know, even a simple way. If you make a mistake with some check, if you make a mistake, and then that mistake keeps multiplying itself as you keep going on, pretty soon you say, where did that $2,000 go? Then you have to trace it back and trace it back. Say, oh, that was the mistake. See what I mean? So in a lot of moral situations, you say, listen, this is horrendous morally. Where's the mistake? Where was the mistake made? Where was it? Now, what most of us do, you try to patch things up. See what I mean? You try to say, oh, well, we'll do a little of this. But then if you say, well, listen, I don't think you've done without that, then people say, oh, well, you can't do that. Well, it usually follows the way life goes about the most serious things. If you can't do anything about that, you won't be able to do anything about this either. You'll do something about this for a day or two, but then it'll get worse and worse and worse and worse. And so it has, okay? So by living the right way, by understanding the right way to live, by seeing the right way to live in terms of Christian wisdom, by doing that, then you will be able to do much more in your life with yourselves, your families, those around you, the church, and finally, even civil society. So therefore, an education like this really is important, and it's not just important while you're here, it has repercussions. Now, people ask me, what can we do when we get out of here? Who knows? What I mean by that is, you never know, and nobody ever knows what he can do anyhow next week. Next week is not here. It's fun to think that the future is more real than the present, but it's not. So, you never know what's going to happen in the future. You never know who you're going to run into. You never know what's going to dawn on you. You never know who you can get together with to bring about what purpose. I do think because this school has existed, there are a lot of high schools now that do things that are much better than they would have done without it. So people have come together and done those kinds of things. My own view is never look at this college as somehow is in a singular way as saying that this is it and nothing else can be it. The view for me is, I think you're doing the right thing. This college is a place where you can do the right thing. The most important thing is not the particular college. The most important thing is what you're doing. And therefore, there ought to be more colleges like this for more kids like this. What I've seen in my experience is, through the homeschooling movement, mothers wouldn't have thought of homeschooling in generations previously because things were never as bad. They got so bad that the mothers simply said, we can't send our kids to these places. The places will destroy them. And therefore, what the mothers have done in homeschooling, to me, is kind of amazing when I meet a lot of you people. I think what the mothers and the fathers, too, have done is amazing. So therefore, what I think is that there ought to be more places like this. There ought to be more colleges like this. If we can do it, then other people can do it. There's nothing extraordinary about us. We were ordinary teachers in a Catholic school who had the right view of education. We only did what we thought was the right thing to do in terms of our duties as Catholics. And therefore, some of you can do really good things with your lives, but you don't know what those things are now because the future's not here, so you don't give up. Now, if this kind of education does not lead to more prayer and more and more of an interior life with Christ, then in a way it's stunted. So the fulfillment of this kind of thing is in the life of prayer and the life of contemplation, and that means for all of us. Therefore, it's really important that you pray more, you think of God more, you use all your resources to serve God, you don't serve man, you use your time well, you study, and then you let God take care of you. You find it in St. Thomas, you find it in all the saints. Does God answer everything you pray for? The answer is no. St. Thomas says God doesn't answer most people's prayers because most people don't ask for the right kinds of things. But he argues that if you ask for something having to do with your salvation, the salvation of your neighbor, and the good, real Christian good, then he says God always answers your prayers. Always. Never, never, never does he not answer those prayers. So if we pray for the right things and we pray for the good things, those prayers will be answered. Therefore, it's inconceivable to me that someone could profit by this kind of education finally without, in a certain sense, turning to God, turning to Christ with an interior life and a life of prayer. Now, I know a lot of people pray already, etc. I wasn't talking to you if you don't pray. I'm just talking to you about what I conceive of this kind of education. Now, I know this much. If you think the school is good, and if you think the school is worthwhile, and etc., I'm telling you that most of the students here right now, at your age, know or can deal intellectually with things far beyond what I could do at your age. I'm telling you that, okay? So, can I do things better intellectually than most of you? Yeah, I think I can, but I've done it for so long. I've been doing it for so long, you know? Therefore, when I was your age, most of you are better than I was. A lot of you have, I think, better sensibilities. I think you have a lot of ability, and you're good. A lot of you, I don't know all of you, but a lot of you, those I know are really good. So there's every hope that you can really do something really good with your lives. And don't say, because you're going to get married and have children, that's a good. If you can raise those kids in the right way, that's a double good. You can multiply yourself, you know? And therefore, that's a good. So don't say you can do no good, because the good things that are done have been done many times by people who nobody knew anything about. Take an example, you know? Nobody knew anything about the little flower while she was alive. All of a sudden, she's dead, and everybody's praying a little flower, and you have all kinds of miracles of roses and things like that. Nobody even heard of her when she was alive. She did good in a monastery, okay? I don't know how many of you have read Blessed Elizabeth of the Trinity. She's great, just simply magnificent. And if you read the saints and read these people, then a lot of them, nobody knew anything about them when they were alive, and all of a sudden you find out that they determine the lives of people who are much more learned than they and much more known than they. So don't ever think that because you're not well known, you're not this, or you're not that, you can't do anything. Because most of the great things that are done are the supernatural things. They're the result of grace. They're not the result of nature. They're the result of grace. That happens all the time among people. Now, I've always said this to people. Don't look for what can get you the most money or what can make you look the best in the world. Don't do that. Ask yourself, what gifts do I have that are worthwhile? How can I use those gifts to serve God, to serve the church, and then go do that with them, okay? Don't ask yourself the other thing. To ask yourself the other thing is to ruin your life. That will ruin your life. Because in the measure in which people get entangled with the world, and in the measure that the world then starts to take over the bulk of their interests, in that measure you slip away. And whatever wisdom you have will leave. You'll be talking about the wisdom of the world, which comes to nothing. Therefore, I think the school's important for the reasons I told you. I think you're important for the school for the reasons I told you. I've told you why I think the community works. I've told you what I think goes against the good of this community. I've also told you that there ought to be more of this kind of education. And I think there can be more of this kind of education. If we can start a school, then other people can start a school. It's not as hard as it sounds. It can be done. But you have to have the determination to do it. And you have to have the belief that you're doing something good. Okay? Now, that's all I can think of telling you. So thank you very much.